I watched in horror as the HOA president grabbed my disabled daughter's arm and dragged her across the driveway, screaming that her leg braces were slowing everyone down. What Karen Mitchell didn't know was that she had just physically assaulted the child of the state attorney general. Big mistake. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The morning that changed everything. The yellow school bus pulled up to Maple Street at exactly 7:45 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 3 months. My 8-year-old daughter Sophie sat in her usual seat, third row from the front, her pink backpack clutched tightly in her small hands. Her leg braces caught the morning sunlight streaming through the bus window, those metal and plastic supports that helped her walk after the car accident that nearly took her life 2 years ago. Sophie was my miracle. After her father died in military service when she was 4, it was just the two of us against the world. Then came the accident. A drunk driver ran a red light and changed our lives forever. Months of surgeries, physical therapy, and sleepless nights followed. But Sophie was a fighter. She never complained about the braces, never asked, "Why me?" She just smiled her bright smile and kept moving forward. That's why seeing her face light up every morning when the bus arrived made my heart swell with pride. School was her happy place. She loved her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, and had made several close friends who never treated her differently because of her braces. But this particular Tuesday morning would be different. This morning would test every ounce of self-control I had built up over my 15-year career as a prosecutor, and now as the state attorney general of our state. I watched from our front porch as Sophie carefully made her way down the bus steps, using the handrail for support. Her movements were deliberate but confident. She had practiced this routine hundreds of times. The bus driver, Mr. Thompson, always waited patiently and gave her an encouraging wave. Sophie was halfway down our driveway when she appeared. Karen Mitchell, the self-appointed queen of Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, came marching across the street like a woman on a mission. Her perfectly styled blonde hair bounced with each aggressive step, and her face was twisted in the kind of righteous anger that only comes from someone who believes they're always right. "Excuse me." Karen's shrill voice cut through the peaceful morning air. "Excuse me, little girl." Sophie stopped and turned around, confused. She wasn't used to strangers yelling at her, especially not on her own property. "Your bus is violating HOA regulations," Karen continued, now standing directly in front of my daughter. Section 12B clearly states that commercial vehicles cannot idle on residential streets for more than 2 minutes. Your special needs are slowing down the entire bus route and creating a traffic hazard. I felt my blood pressure spike, but I stayed on the porch, giving Sophie a chance to handle the situation herself. She was a smart kid, and I had taught her to be polite but firm when adults were unreasonable. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Sophie said in her sweet 8-year-old voice. "I try to be as fast as I can, but my legs don't work like other kids' legs." "That's not my problem," Karen snapped. "Rules are rules. If you can't keep up with normal children, maybe you should find alternative transportation." That's when I saw red. But before I could move from the porch, Karen did something that would haunt my nightmares and fuel my anger for months to come. She grabbed Sophie's arm hard and started dragging her toward the bus. "Come on. Move faster. You're making everyone late," Karen yelled, pulling my daughter with such force that Sophie stumbled and nearly fell. "Stop. You're hurting me," Sophie cried out, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to keep her balance with the leg braces. That was it. That was the moment Karen Mitchell sealed her fate. I was off that porch and across the yard in seconds, my prosecutor instincts kicking in even as my mother's heart broke at the sight of my daughter in distress. "Get your hands off my daughter," I roared, my voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years commanding courtrooms. Karen spun around, still gripping Sophie's arm, her face showing surprise and annoyance rather than shame or apology. "Are you the parent?" she demanded. "You need to teach your child proper bus etiquette. She's disrupting the entire neighborhood with her special accommodations." I gently but firmly removed Karen's hand from Sophie's arm and pulled my daughter close to me. Sophie was shaking and I could feel her tears soaking through my shirt. "Ma'am," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "you just physically assaulted a disabled child on her own property. I strongly suggest you walk away. Now." Karen let out a bitter laugh. "Assaulted? Don't be dramatic. I was simply encouraging her to move faster. This neighborhood has standards, and if you can't meet them, maybe you should consider moving somewhere more suitable." The words hung in the air like poison. I looked down at Sophie, who was trying so hard to be brave despite her tears, and I made a decision that would change Karen Mitchell's life forever. "What's your name?" I asked quietly. "Karen Mitchell, president of Willowbrook Estates HOA, and I don't appreciate your tone. I'll be filing a complaint with the HOA board about this incident and your attitude." "Karen Mitchell," I repeated, memorizing every detail of her face, her voice, her arrogant posture. "Thank you. I'll remember that." The investigation begins. After ensuring Sophie was okay and getting her safely off to school with extra hugs and reassurances, I sat in my home office and did what I do best: I investigated. A quick background check revealed that Karen Mitchell was indeed the HOA president, a position she'd held for 3 years running. But more interestingly, she was also the owner of Mitchell Property Management, a company that managed several HOA communities in our county. As I dug deeper, a pattern began to emerge. Complaint after complaint filed with the county clerk's office. Families with disabled children who had been harassed, fined, or even forced to move from communities managed by Karen's company. Elderly residents who had been intimidated over minor violations. Veterans with PTSD who had been cited for disturbing the peace during their difficult nights. Karen Mitchell wasn't just a neighborhood bully, she was a serial discriminator who used her position of power to target the most vulnerable members of our communities. But the most damaging discovery came when I accessed the court records. 3 active lawsuits against Mitchell Property Management for disability discrimination. 2 more for elder abuse. All being fought with expensive lawyers and aggressive tactics designed to bankrupt the plaintiffs into dropping their cases. My hands shook with anger as I read testimony from a disabled veteran who had been forced to sell his home after Karen's company imposed daily fines for his service dog being in the common areas of his own neighborhood. A mother of an autistic child who had been cited dozens of times for her son's disruptive behavior, which consisted of stimming quietly in their own backyard. Karen Mitchell had made a career out of tormenting people like my daughter. People who were different, vulnerable, or unable to fight back. But she had picked the wrong family this time. I spent the rest of that day making phone calls. To the FBI's Civil Rights Division. To the Department of Justice's Disability Rights Section. To the State Human Rights Commission. To investigative journalists who specialized in HOA abuse cases. By evening, I had opened more investigations into Karen Mitchell and her practices than she could handle with an army of lawyers. But that was just the beginning. The perfect storm. The next morning, Sophie was afraid to go to school. She kept looking out the window, worried that the mean lady would be waiting for her again. "Mommy," she said, her voice small and scared, "why was that lady so angry at me? I didn't do anything wrong, did I?" My heart broke all over again. This brave little girl who had endured surgeries, months of physical therapy, and learning to walk again was now afraid of simply getting on her school bus. "No, sweetheart," I said, kneeling down to her level. "You did absolutely nothing wrong. Some adults forget how to be kind, but that's their problem, not yours." "Will she come back?" Sophie asked, unconsciously rubbing her arm where Karen had grabbed her. "She will never hurt you again," I promised, and I meant every word. I personally walked Sophie to the bus that morning, and I made sure Karen saw me. She was standing in her perfectly manicured front yard, watering flowers and pretending not to watch us. When our eyes met, I gave her a smile that had made career criminals confess in interrogation rooms. 2 hours later, my assistant knocked on my office door. "Ma'am, there are some FBI agents here to see you about the Mitchell case." "Send them in." Special Agent Sarah Chen and Agent Mike Rodriguez entered my office with briefcases full of evidence. They had been investigating Mitchell Property Management for months as part of a larger federal probe into discriminatory housing practices. "Ms. Attorney General," Agent Chen began, "we understand you had a personal encounter with Karen Mitchell yesterday. She physically assaulted my disabled daughter on our own property while hurling discriminatory slurs about her medical condition," I replied matter-of-factly. Agent Rodriguez whistled low. "That's exactly the kind of behavior we've been documenting. We have 17 similar incidents across 4 counties, but most of the victims were too intimidated or financially unable to come forward." "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Your testimony, your daughter's account of events, and—" Agent Chen paused. "We'd like your office to coordinate with us on the state-level charges while we handle the federal civil rights violations." I smiled. It was the same smile I had given Karen that morning. "Agent Chen, it would be my absolute pleasure." The walls close in. Over the next week, Karen Mitchell's world began to unravel in ways she never could have imagined. It started with the surprise HOA board meeting called by 3 other board members who had grown tired of Karen's tyrannical leadership. They had been quietly documenting her discriminatory policies for months, waiting for the right moment to act. The meeting was held on Thursday evening in the community center. I made sure to attend as a concerned resident, sitting quietly in the back row with my legal pad and pen. Karen entered the meeting like a queen holding court, completely unaware that she was walking into an ambush. "I've called this emergency meeting," began board member Jennifer Walsh, "to address serious concerns about discriminatory practices and potential legal liability facing our community under the current administration." Karen's face went pale. "What are you talking about? I run this community according to the rules and regulations that everyone agreed to follow. Rules like fining the Johnson family $50 per day because their son's wheelchair ramp doesn't match the approved color palette?" Jennifer continued. "Or threatening to foreclose on the Rodriguez home because their daughter's therapy appointments create too much traffic on Tuesdays and Thursdays?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd of residents. Many were hearing these details for the first time. "Those are legitimate violations." Karen snapped. "I don't make exceptions just because someone has a sob story." "What about assaulting children at bus stops?" called out a voice from the audience. All heads turned toward me as I stood up slowly. "Yes, I'd like to know the HOA's official position on physically grabbing disabled children and dragging them around while screaming discriminatory slurs." Karen's eyes widened as she recognized me. You can't prove anything. It was a misunderstanding." "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone, "I can prove quite a lot. You see, our doorbell camera captured the entire incident. Would you like me to play it for everyone here?" The room fell silent. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Furthermore," I continued, "as the State Attorney General, I feel obligated to inform this board that Ms. Mitchell is currently under investigation by the FBI, the Department of Justice, the State Human Rights Commission, and my own office for systematic civil rights violations." The gasps from the audience were audible. Karen's face went from pale to bright red. That's impossible. You can't use your position for personal revenge." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "I can't use my position for personal revenge. But I can and will use it to protect disabled children from being physically assaulted by bigoted bullies. The investigation into your pattern of discriminatory behavior began long before you touched my daughter. You just gave us another crime to add to the list." The reckoning. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove Karen as president that very night. But that was just the beginning of her troubles. Friday morning brought news crews to Willowbrook Estates. The story of an HOA president assaulting a disabled child had gone viral on social media, thanks to the security footage I had released to the press. Local reporter Jessica Martinez stood in front of Karen's house with cameras rolling. "This is the home of Karen Mitchell, the now former HOA president who was caught on camera physically dragging an 8-year-old girl with leg braces while shouting discriminatory slurs. Ms. Mitchell has refused our request for comment, but sources tell us that federal and state investigators have been gathering evidence against her for months." I watched the news coverage from my office while reviewing the federal indictment that Agent Chen had just delivered. 16 counts of civil rights violations. Conspiracy to deprive persons of their constitutional rights. Using her position of authority to intimidate and harass protected classes of citizens. Each count carried a potential sentence of 10 years in federal prison. But the state charges were even more satisfying. Assault on a minor. Child endangerment. Disability discrimination. Violation of fair housing laws. Abuse of power. Conspiracy to commit fraud. My phone rang. It was the governor. "I just saw the news," he said. "Please tell me we're throwing the book at this woman." "Sir, we're throwing the entire law library at her." Justice served. The trial took place 6 months later. Karen had hired the most expensive legal team money could buy, but it didn't matter. The evidence was overwhelming. Sophie testified via closed-circuit television to avoid re-traumatizing her. She was brave and clear in her testimony, describing exactly what Karen had done and how it made her feel. "She grabbed my arm really hard and pulled me," Sophie said in her small but steady voice. "It hurt and I was scared. I don't understand why she was so mean to me just because my legs need help to work." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Karen's lawyers tried every defense they could think of. They claimed she was just trying to help. They said she was misunderstood. They argued that she was being persecuted for enforcing legitimate community standards. But the evidence told a different story. 17 other families testified about Karen's pattern of harassment and discrimination. Medical experts explained how dangerous it was to grab and drag a child with leg braces. Child psychologists testified about the lasting trauma such treatment could cause. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. guilty on all counts. Karen Mitchell was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Her property management company was dissolved, and she was ordered to pay $2.3 million in damages to the families she had harmed. But for me, the real justice came 6 months after the trial. The sweet victory. Sophie was playing in our backyard when I got the call from Jennifer Walsh, the new HOA president. "I wanted you to know," Jennifer said, "we've officially renamed the community center. It's now called the Sophie Martinez Inclusion Center." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. That's wonderful. The board unanimously agreed that we wanted to honor your daughter's courage and create a lasting reminder that our community welcomes everyone, regardless of their abilities or differences. That evening, Sophie and I walked to the community center to see the new sign. Sophie traced the letters of her name with her finger, her face glowing with pride. "Mommy, does this mean other kids like me will know they're welcome here?" "Yes, sweetheart. That's exactly what it means." As we walked home, Sophie suddenly stopped and looked up at me with her wise 8-year-old eyes. "Mommy, I'm glad that mean lady was mean to me." I was shocked. "What? Why would you say that?" "Because if she hadn't been mean to me, you wouldn't have been able to help all those other families she was mean to. Sometimes bad things happen so good things can happen later, right?" I knelt down and hugged my daughter tight, marveling at her wisdom and resilience. She was right, of course. Karen Mitchell's moment of cruelty had led to justice for dozens of families who had suffered in silence. 1 year later. Sophie runs to the school bus now. Well, she moves as quickly as her leg braces will allow, but there's no fear in her movement anymore. Just excitement for another day of learning and playing with her friends. The new bus driver, Mrs. Patterson, always waves and tells Sophie to take her time. The other children on the bus have learned about kindness and inclusion from watching Sophie's daily routine. Several of them have even asked their parents about becoming physical therapists or doctors so they can help kids like Sophie. Karen Mitchell is serving her sentence in federal prison. I received a letter from her last month, a rambling, self-pitying attempt at an apology that blamed everyone except herself for her situation. I threw it away without finishing it. Some people never learn. But the impact of our case has rippled far beyond our small community. The federal investigation led to reforms in HOA regulations across 3 states. Disability rights advocates now have stronger legal protections and clearer recourse when they face discrimination. Most importantly, Sophie has grown into an even more confident and compassionate young girl. She speaks at school assemblies about inclusion and kindness. She volunteers at the local children's hospital, reading to other kids who are recovering from injuries like hers. Yesterday, she came home from school with a drawing she had made, a picture of herself and several other children playing together in a playground. Some children in the drawing had wheelchairs, some had hearing aids, one had prosthetic legs, and one was using crutches. At the top of the paper, in her careful 3rd-grade handwriting, she had written, "Friends come in all different ways." I hung that drawing on my office wall, right next to my law degree and my official state attorney general portrait. It serves as a daily reminder of why I do this job and what really matters in life. Sometimes the most important cases aren't the ones that make headlines or change laws, though ours did both. Sometimes the most important cases are the ones that protect the most vulnerable among us and teach bullies that there are consequences for their cruelty. Karen Mitchell learned that lesson the hard way. And Sophie learned that she has the power to stand up for herself and others, even when the odds seem impossible. That's a lesson worth more than any legal victory. The end. Author's note. This story is dedicated to all the children who face discrimination because of their differences, and to the parents who fight for them every single day. Justice may be delayed, but it should never be denied.